I watched it happen in real time, not the price drop. That came later. What I watched was the sequence, the timing, the mechanical precision of what unfolded after the CME announcement hit the wire at 4:47 p.m. Eastern on a Tuesday afternoon. Silver had been running, mid-30s on the screen, not parabolic, not hysterical. Just steady accumulation through thin holiday trade, then the margin requirement notice. Maintenance on the 5,000-ounce contract going from $8,500 to $11,000, a 29% increase. Effective next session. I've seen this before, I know what it means. So I started watching what didn't happen. By the time New York opened the next morning, silver had already dropped $1.80 in the first 90 minutes. Heavy volume, orderly execution, large blocks moving through in intervals that didn't look like panic. They looked like evacuation, coordinated, methodical. No chase, no bounce, just selling into whatever bid was available, and then the market went quiet. That's when I made the first call. I have a contact at a mid-tier dealer who handles institutional flow, physical silver, real metal, not contracts. He didn't answer. I called a second dealer I've known for 6 years. Voicemail. The third one picked up. I asked about sourcing availability and size for a theoretical client. He said he'd call me back. He didn't. That silence is the story. Because here's what you need to understand about the silver market. It's not just a trading instrument. It's not just a speculation vehicle. It's a critical industrial input. Every solar panel uses it. Every electric vehicle contains it. Medical devices, water purification, high-end electronics. The world consumes roughly 1 billion ounces of silver per year, and about half of that demand is industrial. These aren't day traders. These are engineers with production schedules and penalty clauses. When they can't source material, assembly lines stop. So when a margin increase forces a coordinated sell-off in the futures market, and the physical market goes silent in response, that's not normal volatility. That's something else. And what it felt like, sitting there watching depth of book data while my calls went unreturned, was containment. Let me explain what containment means in this context. In a normal market dislocation, you get chaos. Phones ringing, counterparties scrambling, bids widening, people trying to price risk in real time. You get discovery. Messy, loud, inefficient discovery. But what I observed in the 48 hours after this margin increase was the opposite. It was orderly, too orderly. The kind of orderly that suggests one side of the market knew something the other side didn't. Now, I want you to think about what a futures contract actually represents. It's not metal, it's a promise to deliver metal or to settle that promise in cash if delivery becomes inconvenient. Most silver futures never go to delivery. They get rolled forward or closed out before expiration. The entire system is built on the assumption that most participants don't actually want the physical product. They want exposure. They want the price. They want to hedge production or speculate on direction without the cost and logistical complexity of storage, insurance, and transportation. But that assumption has a structural weakness. If too many participants stop trusting the promise and start demanding the actual metal, the system develops a problem. Because the metal exists in finite quantity in specific locations, and moving it takes time. Promises can be created instantly, metal cannot. The way you prevent that problem from becoming a crisis is by making it expensive to hold the promise. You raise margin requirements. You increase the cost of participation. You force weak hands out of the market. You shake out the true believers who might actually stand for delivery. You keep the game in the realm of paper, where supply is theoretically infinite and settlement is negotiable. The price on your screen measures the value of a contract. It does not measure the availability of metal. Those are two different things, and sometimes they move in opposite directions. 4 days after the crash, I received a message from someone I trust. He works in procurement for a mid-sized industrial manufacturer that uses silver in a proprietary alloy. He told me they'd been attempting to lock in a forward purchase contract for second quarter delivery. Not a massive position, 15,000 ounces. That's a rounding error in the context of global consumption. Their usual counterparty quoted them a price, then pulled the quote 6 hours later. No explanation. They approached a second supplier. Same pattern. Quote, then silence. On the third attempt, they were told delivery could be arranged, but the premium over spot price had doubled. Payment would need to be wired in full upfront, and there would be no cancellation provision. He said something to me I haven't stopped thinking about. He said they offered to pay any price, and the supplier still didn't want the business. Now, you need to really understand what that sentence means. In a functioning, healthy market, if a buyer is willing to pay any price for a product, they get it. The seller might squeeze out every last bit of profit. They might add premiums, fees, and every creative surcharge you can imagine. But ultimately, the seller takes the deal. Because that's what sellers do in markets. They sell. When a seller refuses to transact at any price, it means one of two things. Either they don't have the product, or they've been instructed not to sell it. And in a market where sovereign producers, central bank reserves, and exchange-monitored inventories all play a significant role, that second possibility isn't just speculation. It's a structural reality that anyone who's ever worked in physical commodity markets understands deeply. Let me take you somewhere else for a moment, just to paint the full picture. Silver doesn't trade in isolation. It gets mined, often as a byproduct of copper, lead, or zinc operations. It gets refined, usually in facilities that process multiple metals and operate on tight, contracted schedules. It gets transported across borders, which means customs paperwork, insurance policies, and verifying every single counterparty. And it gets stored in vaults that are not infinite in their capacity and are certainly not perfectly liquid in their function. You can't just snap your fingers and have a ton of silver appear on your doorstep. Now consider this. One of the largest silver refineries in Europe went offline for scheduled maintenance just 4 days before this margin. Increase we're talking about. The maintenance was announced weeks in advance, completely routine according to their public statement. Nothing to see here. Except this single facility handles approximately 15% of all European refining capacity, and its offline period has now been extended 3 weeks beyond the original schedule. When I asked a logistics contact if this was affecting physical availability, he told me he couldn't comment on client flow. That's not a denial, that's a wall. It's the kind of professional silence that speaks louder than words. Then there's the insurance situation. Underwriting costs for shipping physical precious metals have increased significantly over the last 6 months. Carriers are repricing risk on certain routes and for certain counterparties. What this means, in practical terms, is that even if you can source the metal and find a willing seller, the cost of just moving it from point A to point B might completely wipe out any savings you thought you were getting. It's a quiet friction, a silent tax. You won't see any headlines about it, no dramatic announcements, just another 0.5% added here, another waiver requirement there. It's death by 1,000 small clauses. This is where the sequence of events really starts to compound and get interesting. So, if refining capacity is constrained, and logistics costs are rising, and suppliers are pulling their quotes, and on top of all that, margin requirements for traders just increased by a massive 29%, what does basic economic theory say should happen next? Price should rise. Scarcity should drive demand. The market should find a new, higher equilibrium price until new supply comes online or consumption drops enough to restore balance. But that's not what happened. The price dropped. Volume completely evaporated. The physical market went eerily silent. That's not economics. That's coordination. Now, I'm not naive about how these complex systems operate. I understand the official explanation you'll hear. The CME, the exchange, will say the margin increase was simply a prudent risk management decision. They'll say it was based on volatility metrics and complex value at risk calculations. They will point to recent price swings and explain that they are just protecting the integrity of the clearinghouse and the safety of the entire system. And on paper, that justification is defensible. It sounds procedural. It sounds institutional. Honestly, it sounds boring, and that's the point. But procedures are never neutral. Timing matters. Context matters more than anything. If you raise margin requirements during a massive price rally, you cool down speculative excess. That makes sense. But if you raise them during a price decline, you accelerate forced liquidation. You force people to sell. And if you raise them immediately before a major option's expiration date or delivery period, you create conditions where anyone holding a leveraged long position has to make a tough choice. Either come up with a lot more capital immediately, or be automatically stopped out of their position at a loss. That's not risk management in isolation. That's influence. That's using the tools of the system to guide the market in a specific direction. I want to be very clear about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying here. I am not claiming there's some secret conspiracy run by a few people in a dark room. What I am saying is that there is a system, and that system has priorities. The first priority is always stability. The second priority is continuity, keeping the game going. And the third, and perhaps most important priority, is ensuring that the major players who rely on paper pricing mechanisms to hedge their real-world exposure don't suddenly decide they'd rather hold the physical metal instead. Because if that preference shift happens at scale, if everyone starts demanding physical delivery at once, the entire architecture of the paper market comes into question. The paper price is supposed to represent the physical metal, but when that link is tested, the system will protect the paper construct at all costs. So what happens next? Where do we go from here? I'll tell you what I expect to see. First, the narrative will stabilize. You'll start hearing from all the usual sources that the sell-off was purely technical in nature. You'll hear that over-leveraged speculators got flushed out, weak hands sold to strong hands. The market is healthier now. That story will be repeated in analyst notes, in financial media summaries, and in algorithm-generated content all over the internet. It will become the consensus view, not because it's necessarily the whole truth, but because it's a tidy explanation. You're going to see a price that looks managed, not explosive. It won't be a panicked collapse or a wild recovery, but a controlled grind that keeps volatility in check. It feels like someone is composing the market, not discovering it. You'll also see tightness in the physical market that the futures price just doesn't reflect. Premiums stay high, delivery times get longer, and smaller buyers get pushed out. They won't call it a shortage, they'll call it a logistics challenge. Then expect more margin increases, small methodical adjustments that make it harder for anyone but the big players to stay in the game. So I have two serious questions for you. First, do you own silver metal or do you own a claim to it? A claim is a promise, a line on a statement. Metal is a physical thing in a vault. If you can't take delivery without restrictions, what you own depends on someone else's willingness to honor their promise. And willingness can change. Second, if the market is working normally, why is there silence when people demand physical delivery? I'm not talking about a flat-out no. Silence is different. It's what happens when decisions are being made behind closed doors. In a market built on physical settlement, silence is a huge red flag. I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm asking you to pay attention to what isn't being said. The most dangerous time isn't when things break, it's the quiet calm right before. I'll keep watching this space, comparing the screen price to the real world. If you want to follow along as this develops, subscribe. Not because I have all the answers, but because I'm asking the questions no one else is. The real story isn't why the price dropped. It's why the physical market went silent when it should have been screaming. That gap is where we are right now.